My son forgot to hang up the phone. That's how I learned they were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could seize my $2 million villa and construction business while I was still breathing. I sat there in my study, staring at the stack of bills I'd been paying when David called about Thanksgiving dinner. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The conversation had seemed normal enough. David asking if I needed anything from the store, whether I'd remembered to take my medications, the same patronizing tone he'd been using since Margaret passed 2 years ago. Then I heard the muffled sounds of movement, voices in the background. He'd set the phone down without hanging up. "Did you talk to Dr. Hoffman today?" That was Sarah's voice, my daughter-in-law, sharp as always. "Yeah, she'll testify that his hoarding behavior and social isolation indicate cognitive decline. The workshop full of tools, never leaving the house, talking to himself." My hands started shaking. Not from age, from rage. "What about the timeline?" Sarah again, always focused on logistics. 6 months, maybe less. Once we file the petition, the court will appoint a temporary conservator, that'll be me. Then we can start liquidating assets before he gives away any more money to those stupid charities. I gripped the phone tighter. David laughed. Actually laughed. "The old man's been dead weight long enough. It's time we got what we deserve. 43 years I've waited for him to die, and now he's talking about living to 90 like his father did." "The house alone is worth $1.8 million, Sarah said. "Plus the business assets, the savings accounts. We're talking about our children's future here. Emma will understand when she's older. Kids adapt. Besides, she'll be better off with us making the financial decisions instead of some senile old man who thinks giving money to homeless shelters is sound investment strategy." That's when I hung up. Quietly, carefully, like I was handling dynamite. I sat in Margaret's favorite chair for 3 hours, staring at her photograph on the mantel, the woman who'd worked beside me for 43 years, who'd held my hand when the doctors told us David would be our only child, who'd made me promise on her deathbed to never let anyone take advantage of my good heart. But that wasn't the worst thing they'd said. The worst thing was hearing my own son discuss my death like he was waiting for a business deal to close, like I was an inconvenience preventing him from accessing his rightful property, like the man who'd worked 16-hour days to pay for his law school education was nothing more than an obstacle to be legally removed. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee. My hands were steady now. Margaret always said I was at my most dangerous when I stopped shaking and started thinking. Then I picked up the phone and made a call that would change everything. For 43 years, I built houses for other families while my own family planned to steal mine. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there since Margaret's funeral, maybe longer. I remembered David at 8 years old, helping me measure lumber in the garage. "When I grow up, I want to build houses just like you, Dad." But by high school, construction work was beneath him. By college, he was embarrassed when his fraternity brothers learned his father worked with his hands. Law school changed him completely. I gave him everything. $50,000 for his first house down payment when Sarah decided my neighborhood wasn't suitable for their social aspirations. Another $20,000 when his law practice struggled in the first year, paid for Emma's private school when they claimed public education would limit her opportunities. After Margaret died, David's visits became business transactions. "Dad, you really shouldn't be living alone in this big house. What if you fall? What if someone breaks in?" Always followed by suggestions about nice communities for people in my situation. But that wasn't what convinced me of his true intentions. 3 months after the funeral, I found David in Margaret's sewing room with a measuring tape, just checking if this could be converted to an office, he'd said. "You know, for when the house eventually changes hands." Sarah had been in our bedroom, photographing Margaret's jewelry. For insurance purposes, she'd explained when I caught her. "You should really have these pieces appraised." I should have recognized the wolves circling then. Instead, I chalked it up to grief, making everyone act strangely. The last family dinner had been the real revelation. Sarah spent the entire evening criticizing our outdated furniture, suggesting I'd be happier somewhere with people my own age and organized activities. David nodded along, already mentally rearranging our living room. "This house is really too much for one person," Sarah had said, cutting her steak with surgical precision. "The maintenance alone must be overwhelming." "I built this house," I'd replied quietly. "I know every pipe, every wire, every board. It's not overwhelming. It's home." "But Dad," David had interrupted, "be realistic. You're 72. What happens when you can't climb stairs anymore? What happens when you can't drive?" "What happens is, I adapt. Like I adapted when your mother got sick. Like I adapted when she died. Like I've been adapting my whole life." They'd exchanged that look. The one married couples share when they think they're being subtle, the look that said they'd already made decisions about my life without consulting me. Margaret had tried to warn me, 3 days before she died, when the morphine made her unusually direct. "Don't let them take advantage of your good heart, Bob. David sees dollar signs when he looks at you now. I've watched him counting our things like he's already inherited them." I'd thought it was the medication talking. Margaret had always been protective, sometimes seeing threats that weren't there. But she'd been married to me for 43 years. She knew David better than anyone except me. And she'd been right about everything except one thing. Margaret always said David had her eyes, but my stubborn streak, she was wrong. David had neither. But I was about to show him what stubborn really looked like. While my son plotted to steal my life, my 16-year-old granddaughter Emma was the only one who asked how I was feeling. She came every Tuesday after school, just like she had since Margaret's funeral. Today she brought oatmeal cookies she'd baked in home economics class. "Grandpa, these probably taste terrible, but Mrs. Peterson said practice makes perfect." Emma set the container on my workbench and picked up a piece of sandpaper. We were refinishing an old rocking chair together, something to keep our hands busy while we talked. "They smell like your grandmother's," I said, testing one. "Maybe a little less vanilla, but the love's the same." Emma smiled. But I caught the worry in her eyes. At 16, she was old enough to sense the tension in her family, too young to understand the true scope of her parents' greed. "Grandpa, are you okay? Really okay?" She focused on sanding the chair's armrest, not meeting my eyes. "Mom and Dad have been acting weird lately, fighting about money all the time." My chest tightened. "What kind of fighting, sweetheart?" "I don't know exactly, but I heard them talking about Grandpa's situations last night, and Mom keeps saying we need to think about what's best for everyone and family responsibilities." The sandpaper in my hand stilled. They were already preparing Emma for my removal from the family, conditioning her to accept their narrative about my decline and their difficult decision to take control. "Have they said anything about me specifically?" I kept my voice casual, but my pulse quickened. Emma shrugged, still focused on her sanding. "Just that you've been sad since Grandma died, and that big houses can be dangerous for older people. Oh, and Mom said I shouldn't visit you alone anymore, because you might get confused and forget I'm here." The bastards were isolating me from the one family member who actually cared about my well-being, using Emma's safety as justification for cutting off our relationship. But that wasn't the most damaging thing they'd done. "Emma, have your parents asked you questions about my behavior? About whether I seem forgetful or confused?" She looked up then, genuine confusion in her face. "Yeah, actually. Last week Dad asked if you ever repeat yourself or seem lost when I'm here. I told him you're the smartest person I know, but he just nodded like that wasn't what he wanted to hear." They were coaching her, trying to turn my own granddaughter into a witness against me. The investigator's report had mentioned this, but hearing it from Emma made it real. "Grandpa, you're not going anywhere, are you? Mom mentioned something about communities and professional care, but that's not happening, right?" I set down my sandpaper and looked at this beautiful girl who'd inherited Margaret's gentle heart and my stubborn loyalty to family. She deserved better than parents who saw elderly relatives as financial obstacles. "Emma, I want you to remember something. No matter what your parents tell you about me, no matter what anyone tells you, I love you more than any house or money or business could ever be worth." You're the best thing our family ever produced." She hugged me then, fierce and protective. "I love you too, Grandpa, and I don't care what anyone says about you being confused. You're the only one who treats me like I have a brain." As Emma hugged me goodbye, I made a promise to myself, whatever happened to me, I would make sure her parents' greed didn't poison the one pure relationship I had left. I called my lawyer expecting legal advice. Instead, she told me my own son had already been asking about my mental state and estate planning. Janet Torres had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years. Her voice carried a professional caution I'd never heard before. "Bob, I need to tell you something that's been bothering me for weeks. David contacted my office 3 weeks ago." My coffee went cold in my hands. "About what?" "He claimed he was concerned about your mental health. Asked about conservatorship proceedings and whether recent behavior changes might warrant family intervention." The words hit me like physical blows. 3 weeks ago, that meant David had been planning this since before the overheard phone call. The conversation I'd witnessed wasn't the beginning of their scheme. It was just the latest progress report. What exactly did he ask? Janet's sigh carried the weight of bad news. Specific questions about the legal requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent, the process for obtaining conservatorship, whether documented instances of concerning behaviors could support a petition. "And you told him?" "Nothing, Bob. Attorney-client privilege protects you, not him. But I can tell you now, because he's forced my hand. He specifically mentioned your hoarding behaviors in the workshop, your social isolation since Margaret's death, and what he called increasingly erratic financial decisions. I thought about the tools in my garage, organized and maintained like they'd been for 40 years. The social isolation that was actually grief-focused healing. The erratic financial decisions that were probably my recent charitable donations. Janet, how serious is this threat?" "Very serious, Bob. With the right psychiatrist testimony and documented behavioral evidence, conservatorship proceedings can move quickly, especially when the petitioner is a family member claiming concern for the subject's welfare." The clinical language couldn't hide the brutal reality. My own son was building a legal case to have me declared incompetent so he could steal everything I'd worked for. But that wasn't the worst part. "Janet, in your experience, how often do these family conservatorship cases succeed?" Her pause told me everything. When they're well prepared and the subject doesn't mount an effective defense, about 60% of the time. The courts tend to err on the side of caution when family members express genuine seeming concern. And David's a lawyer. Yes, he knows exactly how to present his case for maximum impact. Emotional appeals about family safety, professional psychiatric testimony, documented evidence of decline. It's a sophisticated strategy. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. What's my best defense? Prove your competency beyond question. Document your mental acuity, your careful decision-making, your rational planning. Make it impossible for any psychiatrist to claim you're declining. And if I don't? Janet's professional mask slipped for a moment. "Bob, I've seen this before. Adult children who view their parents as financial assets to be managed rather than people to be loved. They use the legal system as a weapon, and they're often successful because the system assumes family members act in good faith. But David isn't acting in good faith. No, he's not. But proving that in court requires evidence, preparation, and strategic thinking. Right now he thinks you're an unsuspecting victim who won't see his attack coming." I thought about David's confidence during the overheard phone call, his casual discussion of timelines and asset liquidation, his assumption that I was too naive or too grief-stricken to protect myself. He'd always underestimated me. Even as a child, David assumed his book learning made him smarter than his father, who worked with his hands. He'd never understood that building a successful construction company required the same strategic thinking as any other business. Janet handed me a business card for a private investigator. "If you're going to fight this, you need to know everything they're planning. Knowledge is power, Bob. And right now they think you're powerless." The private investigator's report landed on my desk like a bomb. My son had been planning to steal my life for 8 months. I'd hired Tom Rodriguez based on Janet's recommendation, expecting maybe some surveillance photos and phone records. Instead, I got a 40-page document that read like a criminal conspiracy. David and Sarah had been meeting with Dr. Patricia Hoffman since January. She was a psychiatrist who specialized in elder care assessments, with a reputation for finding cognitive decline in patients she'd never actually examined. Her fee structure included bonuses for testimony that supported family conservatorship petitions. The report detailed their methodical preparation. They'd researched the legal timeline for asset seizure, consulted with financial advisors about the fastest way to liquidate my holdings, and even selected a suitable assisted living facility, Heritage Manor, 45 minutes away from Emma's school, far enough to make regular visits inconvenient. But that wasn't the most chilling discovery. Tom had recorded David and Sarah discussing which of my possessions to keep versus sell. Margaret's engagement ring was going to Sarah. The antique furniture would be auctioned unless it fit their aesthetic. My workshop tools would be donated to charity for the tax deduction. 40 years of carefully maintained equipment treated like garage sale leftovers. They'd calculated my expiration timeline. Based on family medical history and actuarial tables, they estimated I had 8 to 12 years remaining. Sarah had argued for immediate asset seizure, claiming that waiting risked my giving away more money to charities. David preferred a slower approach that would look less suspicious in court. The key is making it seem like we're reluctantly accepting responsibility. David had told his wife, judges respond better to families who appear burdened by duty rather than motivated by greed. The most devastating section detailed their plan to use Emma as a witness. They'd been coaching her to report concerns about my mental state, suggesting she tell the court about times I seemed confused or forgetful. When Emma resisted, Sarah had threatened to restrict her college fund if she didn't support the family during this difficult transition. My granddaughter was being blackmailed into testifying against me. The investigation revealed David's lies to extended family. He'd told my brother in Phoenix that I'd specifically requested their help managing my affairs. He'd informed Margaret's sister that I'd been asking about assisted living options. He'd created a narrative where I was the one seeking help, making their intervention seem like compassionate response rather than predatory opportunism. Tom's surveillance had captured David meeting with 3 different elder care attorneys, shopping for the most aggressive representation. The final choice was someone who specialized in complex family situations and had a 90% success rate in conservatorship proceedings. But that wasn't the most damaging evidence. The report included bank records, showing David had been using his expected inheritance as collateral for risky investments. He owed $180,000 on margin calls from failed stock trades, with payments due in 6 months. His law practice was struggling, having lost 2 major clients in the past year. Sarah's credit card debt exceeded $40,000, mostly from maintaining appearances at their country club. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. My money wasn't their inheritance anymore. It was their salvation from financial ruin they'd created through their own poor decisions. I closed the report and walked to my safe. If David wanted to play legal games, I had 40 years of business experience and a clean conscience on my side. Time to remind him who taught him to plan ahead. While my son planned to steal my $2 million fortune, I was quietly giving it away to the people who actually deserved it. I started with the Children's Hospital where Margaret had volunteered every Thursday for 10 years. $500,000 donated in her memory with a ceremony that made the local newspaper. The hospital administrator, Dr. Sarah Kim, nearly cried when I handed her the check. "Mr. Mitchell, this will fund our new pediatric wing. Your wife would be so proud." "She is proud," I said simply. "Somewhere she's proud." The donation came with specific requirements. Public announcement, detailed documentation of my mental competency during the planning process, and photographs of me clearly explaining my reasoning to multiple witnesses. I wasn't just giving away money, I was building an unshakable legal defense. Next came the homeless shelter my construction company had helped build 15 years ago, $400,000, enough to expand their capacity by 30 beds. Father Miguel Santos from St. Catherine's Parish served as my witness and moral counselor. "Bob," Are you certain about this? Father Miguel asked, as we signed the paperwork in his office. This is a substantial portion of your wealth. Father, I've spent 72 years learning the difference between having money and having meaning. Margaret taught me that generosity is the only wealth that multiplies when you share it. Father Miguel smiled. Your wife was a wise woman. Wise enough to warn me about David's character before she died. I should have listened sooner. But the most important transfer was Emma's college fund, $300,000 placed in an irrevocable trust that matured when she turned 18. David and Sarah couldn't touch it, couldn't redirect it, couldn't use it as leverage against her testimony. I met with Janet Torres to structure the trust with bulletproof legal protections. Emma would receive full disclosure about the fund on her 18th birthday, along with a letter explaining why her grandfather had chosen to protect her future from her parents' financial desperation. The remaining $200,000 went to St. Catherine's Parish, establishing the Margaret Mitchell Memorial Scholarship for children from working-class families who wanted to pursue higher education. Kids like David had been before entitlement poisoned his appreciation for opportunity. Each donation required extensive documentation. Psychiatric evaluations confirming my mental competency, financial analysis proving my understanding of complex asset management, and witness testimony about my careful decision-making process. Elizabeth Harper, a geriatric psychiatrist with impeccable credentials, spent 3 hours evaluating my cognitive function. Mr. Mitchell, your mental acuity is remarkable for someone half your age, she concluded. These charitable decisions demonstrate sophisticated planning and clear moral reasoning. Anyone claiming you lack capacity for financial decisions would be committing perjury. But that wasn't the most satisfying part of my strategy. The newspaper coverage of my donations painted a picture of a thoughtful, generous widower honoring his late wife's values through strategic philanthropy. The local business journal ran a feature story about my legacy of giving and my sharp business acumen in structuring the charitable trusts. Every article became evidence against David's claim that I was mentally declining. Every photograph showed a clear-eyed man making complex decisions with careful consideration. Every witness statement contradicted the narrative of confusion and incompetence David planned to present in court. Father Miguel asked me if I was sure about giving away my life's work. I told him I wasn't giving it away. I was investing it in people who understood the difference between earning something and stealing it. David walked into my house expecting to find a confused old man. Instead, he found a father who knew exactly what his son really was. He brought Dr. Hoffman with him, just as the investigator's report had predicted. They arrived for what David called a wellness check, but what I recognized as evidence gathering for their conservatorship petition. "Dad, you look tired," David said, settling into Margaret's chair without invitation. "Are you sleeping okay? Eating regular meals?" Dr. Hoffman positioned herself near the window with a notebook, pretending to be casual while documenting my responses. She was younger than I'd expected, probably 45, with the artificial sympathy of someone who'd never experienced real hardship. "I sleep fine when people aren't plotting to steal my house," I replied calmly. David's smile faltered. "Dad, nobody's trying to steal anything. We're concerned about your welfare, living alone at your age. In a house this size, it's a lot of responsibility. Like the responsibility of raising a child who grows up to betray his father." Dr. Hoffman looked up from her notes. "Mr. Mitchell, do you sometimes feel that people are working against you? That family members have hidden motivations?" I laughed. Actually laughed. "Doctor, would you like to hear the recording of my son discussing my expiration timeline and debating whether to liquidate my business immediately or wait until I'm dead?" The color drained from David's face. Dr. Hoffman's pen stopped moving. "I don't know what you think you heard, but—" "I know exactly what I heard, David. 8 months of planning. Dr. Hoffman's fee structure, including bonuses for favorable testimony, Heritage Manor's cost estimates. Your wife's credit card debt that requires my money to resolve." David stood up, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Dad, you're clearly confused. These paranoid fantasies are exactly why we're concerned about your mental state." "Paranoid fantasies?" I walked to my desk and pulled out Tom Rodriguez's report. Is it paranoid to hire a private investigator? Is it fantasy to document every conversation, every meeting, every lie you've told about my mental health? Or Dr. Hoffman cleared her throat. Mr. Mitchell, these feelings of persecution often indicate, Doctor. Before you finish that sentence, you should know that Janet Torres, Father Miguel Santos, and Mrs. Chen from next door are witnessing this conversation from the kitchen. Everything you say is being recorded and documented. Both David and Dr. Hoffman froze. They'd walked into my house expecting to find a victim. Instead, they'd found someone who understood their game better than they did. But that wasn't when they realized how completely I'd outmaneuvered them. David, would you like to know what I've done with the money you were planning to steal? You can't just give away our inheritance. The words exploded from him before he could stop them, revealing his true motivation in front of his own psychiatric witness. Our inheritance? I built this wealth through 40 years of 16-hour days. You've contributed nothing except a law degree I paid for and a sense of entitlement I apparently fostered through too much generosity. Sarah burst through the front door at that moment, as if she'd been waiting outside for her cue. What's this nonsense about inappropriate donations? Those transfers are clearly evidence of diminished capacity. Hello, Sarah. Dr. Hoffman, meet my daughter-in-law. Notice how she immediately assumes ownership of my assets and characterizes charitable giving as mental illness. Fascinating clinical material, don't you think? Sarah's face flushed red. You had no right to give away Emma's inheritance. Emma's inheritance is safe, $300,000 in an irrevocable trust that matures when she turns 18, protected from parents who would blackmail their own daughter into lying about her grandfather's mental health. David and Sarah exchanged panicked looks. Their entire scheme depended on my being an easy target, too naive to recognize their manipulation. Finding out I'd not only seen through their plan but systematically dismantled, it left them scrambling for damage control. Those donations prove you're not thinking clearly, David said desperately. No rational person gives away millions to charity. No rational person tries to steal from their elderly father either, but here we are. Dr. Hoffman stood up abruptly. I think this assessment is complete, Mr. Mitchell. Someone from my office will contact you about scheduling a formal evaluation. Doctor, you might want to reconsider that. Providing false testimony in conservatorship proceedings is a felony, and I have documented evidence of your consultation fees and bonus structure for favorable family testimony. She was out the door before I finished speaking. As David and Sarah stormed out, I called after them. Next time you want to steal someone's life, make sure you hang up the phone properly. The front door slammed so hard it rattled the windows Margaret had loved. David filed for conservatorship anyway. He had no idea I'd been recording our conversations for 3 months. The court hearing was scheduled for October 15th, exactly 2 months after I'd overheard their original scheme. David's petition claimed my erratic financial behavior and paranoid delusions about family members demonstrated clear cognitive decline requiring immediate intervention. I read his filing with something approaching admiration for the sheer audacity. According to David, I was a confused elderly man giving away the family fortune to random charities while imagining complex conspiracies involving people who loved me. He painted himself as a reluctant son forced to take legal action to protect his father from self-destructive decisions. The petition included Dr. Hoffman's preliminary assessment, written entirely from David's descriptions of my behavior. She'd never actually met me, but she confidently diagnosed probable cognitive impairment with paranoid features based on second-hand reports of my hoarding and social withdrawal. Janet Torres reviewed the filing with barely contained fury. This is legal fraud, Bob. They're asking the court to steal your life based on fabricated evidence and purchase testimony. Can they win? Not with the defense we've prepared. But you need to understand conservatorship hearings are designed to protect vulnerable elderly people. The bar for proving incompetence is deliberately low. If we weren't ready for this, they might have succeeded. But we were ready. Janet had assembled a defense that would have impressed Margaret with its thoroughness and strategic precision. The hearing room was packed. Emma sat in the front row, having chosen to testify for me despite her parents' threats. Father Miguel provided character testimony while Dr. Elizabeth Harper presented her comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Janet Torres orchestrated the presentation like the experienced litigator she was. David's case collapsed during cross-examination. When asked about specific instances of my alleged confusion, he could only cite conversations he'd misinterpreted or taken out of context. His examples of hoarding behavior were photos of my organized workshop, which any contractor would recognize as professional tool storage. But that wasn't what destroyed his credibility. The turning point came when Janet played the recordings. David's own voice filled the courtroom, casually discussing my expiration timeline and debating asset liquidation strategies. Sarah's laughter when she talked about my dead weight status, their cold calculation of how quickly they could seize control once I was declared incompetent. The judge's expression shifted from professional neutrality to barely controlled disgust. "Mr. Mitchell, are you telling this court that you recorded private conversations with your father?" "Your Honor, I was consulting with my wife about family concerns." "You were planning to defraud an elderly man based on fabricated psychiatric testimony and false claims of incompetence." Emma's testimony was the final nail in their coffin. At 17, she spoke with dignity and clarity about her grandfather's mental sharpness, his careful teaching, his thoughtful approach to every decision. When David's attorney suggested she might be too young to recognize signs of cognitive decline, Emma looked directly at her father. "I'm old enough to recognize when someone is lying about someone I love." Dr. Hoffman never appeared. Her attorney sent a letter withdrawing her testimony due to scheduling conflicts, but everyone understood she was avoiding perjury charges. The judge dismissed David's petition with prejudice, meaning he could never file again. As we left the courthouse, David looked at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, old man." I smiled and said, "You're right, son, it's just beginning." I didn't need to destroy my son's life. His greed and arrogance did that for me. The local legal community is smaller than people realize, and news of David's attempt to defraud his elderly father spread quickly through the courthouse corridors and bar association meetings. Within 2 weeks, David lost his biggest client, a real estate development firm that decided they couldn't trust someone who'd betray his own family. His law firm's managing partner called him in for a performance review that was actually a disciplinary hearing about bringing negative publicity to their practice. Sarah's social circle at the country club proved equally unforgiving. Women who'd once competed for her attention now whispered behind her back about those people who tried to steal from that poor widower. Their membership was quietly suspended after several members complained about feeling uncomfortable around them. But that wasn't the most satisfying consequence. The stress of their failed scheme and its aftermath exposed the fundamental weakness in David and Sarah's marriage. They'd never actually liked each other, only what each represented in terms of social status and financial security. Without the prospect of my inheritance to bind them together, they began turning their manipulative tactics on each other. Sarah filed for divorce 6 months later, citing David's financial mismanagement and failure to provide adequate security for their family's future. She'd apparently been documenting his risky investments and questionable business decisions, preparing her own exit strategy while they plotted against me. David's law license came under review when his investment losses triggered an investigation into his client account management. The state bar discovered he'd been using expected inheritance as collateral for high-risk stock trades, a practice that violated several ethical guidelines about financial responsibility. Emma, meanwhile, thrived in the environment I provided. She moved in with me full-time after her parents' separation, using their documented psychological manipulation as grounds for legal emancipation. At 17, she was mature enough to choose her own living situation, especially when that situation included a stable home and a grandfather who'd already secured her educational future. The house came alive again with Emma's presence. She brought friends over for study groups, filled the kitchen with the smell of experimental cooking, and turned Margaret's sewing room into an art studio. The outdated furniture Sarah had criticized became the backdrop for a home where young people felt welcome and valued. Father Miguel visited regularly, often bringing other parishioners who'd heard about my charitable work and wanted to discuss their own legacy planning. My story became a cautionary tale about family greed, but also an inspiring example of how generosity could create meaning beyond mere wealth accumulation. But the most profound change was in my own sense of purpose. For 40 years, I'd measured success by what I could build and accumulate. The business, the house, the investment portfolio, all symbols of my ability to provide security for my family. Margaret's death had left me questioning the value of those achievements, wondering if I'd spent my life chasing the wrong goals. David's betrayal clarified everything. Wealth without wisdom is just numbers on paper. Success without character is just sophisticated failure. I'd been successful in business but had somehow failed as a father, raising a son who saw relationships as transactions and family as financial opportunity. Margaret used to say that the truth has a way of surfacing, like oil on water. Watching David's house of lies collapse, I finally understood what she meant. A year later, I sit in the same chair where I first overheard my son's betrayal, but now Emma sits beside me, and the house feels like a home again. She's 18 now, officially an adult, though she's been more mature than her father for years. Today we're reviewing her college applications, and she's chosen architecture as her major. "I want to build things that last," she tells me, echoing words I'd said to David 30 years ago. "Things that matter." "Your grandmother would be proud," I say, and mean it completely. Emma's trust fund matured on her birthday, along with my letter explaining why I'd protected her future from her parents' greed. She read it quietly, then hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Grandpa, I'm sorry they tried to hurt you." "Sweetheart, they couldn't hurt me. They could only reveal who they really were." David and Sarah's divorce finalized 6 months ago. David lost the house, his law practice partnership, and most of his professional reputation. He works now as a junior associate at a small firm across town handling traffic tickets and minor civil disputes. Sarah moved to Phoenix, claiming she needed a fresh start away from the social consequences of their failed scheme. Neither has attempted to contact Emma since she chose to live with me. They sent a birthday card with no return address, but she threw it away unopened. "Some relationships aren't worth maintaining," she said with wisdom that reminded me of Margaret. The charitable work has expanded beyond my original donations. I serve on the boards of 3 organizations now, helping other successful people think through their legacy planning. Many are dealing with their own concerns about entitled children or family members who view elderly relatives as financial opportunities rather than people deserving respect. Father Miguel remains my closest advisor and friend. He performs Emma's confirmation next month, and she's asked me to be her sponsor. Margaret would have loved seeing our granddaughter choose faith over the materialism her parents exemplified. The house buzzes with activity now. Emma's friends study here regularly, drawn by the combination of quiet space and homemade cookies. I've started teaching woodworking classes in the garage, passing along skills I learned from my own father 60 years ago. The hoarding behavior David cited as evidence of my mental decline has become a neighborhood resource center. Mrs. Chen from next door stops by every few days, usually with soup or fresh vegetables from her garden. She's become Emma's honorary grandmother, filling the role Margaret would have played if cancer hadn't stolen her too early. "Your grandfather is a very smart man," she tells Emma regularly. "He sees people's hearts clearly. But the most meaningful change is internal. I no longer wake up angry at David's betrayal. Anger requires energy I prefer to invest in positive relationships and purposeful activities. I feel sad sometimes, grieving for the son I thought I'd raised and the family relationship that never really existed. But sadness is clean pain, honest emotion that honors what was lost without demanding revenge against those responsible for the loss. People ask me if I regret giving away my fortune instead of leaving it to family. I tell them I gave it to the only family that mattered, Emma, and the community that showed me what real love looks like. David taught me that blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty, respect, and genuine care do. Margaret was right about everything except one thing: David didn't get her eyes or my stubbornness, but Emma did. And that's worth more than any inheritance I could have left. The phone rings sometimes. always with caller ID blocked. I assume it's David or Sarah, though I never answer, whatever they want to say. I heard enough during that first conversation when David forgot to hang up the phone. That accidental moment of truth revealed everything I needed to know about their character and their intentions. Emma graduates high school in 3 months, valedictorian of her class despite the chaos her parents created during junior year. She's been accepted to architectural programs at 3 excellent universities, her choice funded by the trust that her parents can never touch. "Grandpa," she said yesterday, while we worked on refinishing Margaret's hope chest, "I want to design homes for people who can't afford architects. Beautiful spaces for families who work with their hands like you did." "That sounds like something your grandmother would support," I replied, thinking about Margaret's volunteer work with homeless families and her belief that everyone deserved dignity and beauty in their living space. "I learned from the best," Emma said, smiling at me with Margaret's eyes, and my stubborn determination to make the world better through honest work and genuine care for others. Margaret's photograph still sits on the mantel, but I no longer stare at it for hours wondering what she would think about my decisions. I know what she thinks. Somewhere beyond this complicated world of greed and betrayal and legal manipulation, she's proud of the choice I made to protect what mattered and let go of what didn't. The inheritance David wanted so desperately is gone, transformed into scholarships and hospital wings and homeless shelters that will serve people for decades after I'm gone. The business he planned to liquidate has been sold to my employees, ensuring that the men who built it with me will continue earning good wages long after I retire. But the real inheritance, the knowledge of right from wrong, the understanding that relationships matter more than money, the wisdom that generosity creates meaning while greed destroys souls, that inheritance lives on in Emma's character and in the example we've set for everyone who witnessed this year's events. I built houses for 40 years, but I spent 72 years learning how to build a life. The difference between construction and character is that buildings eventually crumble, but the principles you pass on to people who love you become immortal. David forgot to hang up the phone, and in that moment of careless honesty he gave me the greatest gift of my life: clarity about who deserved my love, my trust, and my legacy. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.